Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Tommy Edwards.
My Uncle Tommy's music was geared at telling a beautiful story.
What was old can be new again. And his style of music was a comforting style.
It was smooth, it was understandable, clear. The voice was mellow, he was a real crooner. And for the most part, told a love story. But in terms of his own life, I think he maybe missed out. It's what I really think. And I think he was lonely.
But the record is clear. He continues to have a place in American music. He continues to be popular. But we'll never know what else Tommy might have been able to do.
Singer-songwriter Tommy Edwards crooned his way to the top of the charts in the 1950s, selling millions of records in the U.S. and around the world, appearing on programs of entertainment icons Ed Sullivan and Dick Clark, and headlining shows in major cities. Tony Bennett, Red Foley, Louis Jordan, and other leading artists recorded his compositions. But fame would prove to be fleeting for Henrico's biggest star, who found his career peaking at the same time American popular music was changing dramatically. Thomas Jefferson Edwards was born in Henrico on October 15, 1922, one of 6 children of Thomas Sr., a prominent educator, and Buena Vista Edwards.
My grandparents were inspirational, they were well educated, and for the time, very progressive. My grandfather graduated from Hampton Institute, now Hampton University, in the early 1900s. My grandmother, really unheard of for a black woman to go to college, went to Talladega College for 2 years. They were very musical. My grandfather sang in the Hampton Institute choir. My grandmother was a classical singer and sang in the Talladega choir. My grandparents had 6 children. They had 4 girls and 2 boys. And of course, one of those girls was my mother, Buena Vista Edwards Peace.
Tommy was born in Henrico, but he spent the first 6 years in Hanover County. They lived on what is now Pemberton. There was 14 acres or so that came with the house. In the summertime, the kids helped out with the gardening. I think from the very beginning, though, there was a real emphasis on music as well as education. Tommy's sister, Jessie, took lessons in piano, and she taught Tommy piano.
My grandfather also taught at Quagerson Elementary School, and then at Randolph High School. I guess it was Randolph Training School at that time. And of course, my Uncle Tommy attended Quagerson Elementary School and Randolph High School. I think you had to be a good kid. I think all of my aunts and uncles had to be on their best behavior, especially with my grandfather being there, because he was a disciplinarian. I think Tommy's earliest kind of his introduction to the musical world was kind of twofold. He sang in the church, in the Quagerson Baptist Church, where the family attended. He sang in church on most Sundays, and then when the family returned home from the church service, they would all gather around the piano and continue singing at home. And I think it was just in his DNA, because he inherited a lot of that musical talent from my grandparents, and then just kind of honed his own skills. I think he was just destined to go into music.
In October 1939, he's 17 years old, and he goes on the air.
Tommy, his brother Nathan, and my Aunt Harriet appeared on the radio network, WRNL, every week. And they had a 15-minute to a 30-minute show. And they were all in high school.
It was a piano and patter type program. I think Tommy probably played the piano a little bit, maybe some of the popular tunes of the day. He may have sneaked in some of his own compositions. He wanted to be a songwriter. It stayed on the air for a year. I think people enjoyed the Tommy Edwards show.
They had a special talent that was recognized as special because thinking about the times and the 30s and 40s, and we're thinking in terms of, you know, 3 black kids knocking on the door of a radio station and saying, you know, we're ready to sing every week. That just doesn't happen unless you have some real special talent.
That special talent and the same fearless ambition that led him to WRNL's door would push Tommy to make another bold move. By 1943, at just 20 years old, he was working to break in as a songwriter in New York City, the heart of the American music business.
New York was the mecca for music. You had Broadway, you had Tin Pan Alley. And if you were going to do anything as a songwriter, that was the place to go. I think sometimes about Tommy and his sister Harriet. They were up there at the same time. I don't know who went first, who followed after, but they were up there at the same time. 2 young African-American kids, young adults, from the wilds of Henrico County in the Big Apple, and how exciting that must have been. They took in the sights, they took in the culture. They attended performances of classical music, they attended the ballet performances, opera, and then of course there was the nightlife.
Tommy began to make his mark in New York. His first breakthrough came when a song he had written advanced towards the top of the race charts, the forerunner of the R&B chart, in 1946. He then signed contracts with 2 labels, Top Records and then later National Records.
Some of the early milestones would be, That Chick's Too Young to Fry. That was sort of a mildly risque rhythm and blues piece that Tommy wrote. I actually wrote much of it at the house over here in Henrico County.
Hey boy, don't you harm that bird, don't you dare to try. Start releasing that chicken or you get a licking, that chick's too young to fry. Hey boy, better take my word, here's the reason why. You gotta feed her up steady till she gets ready, that chick's too young to fry.
After that, he wrote another song that Tony Bennett recorded, that One Lie Leads to Another, which was essentially a jazz tune. Then in '47, Tommy formed the Tommy Edwards Trio with 2 other African-American musicians. And this was probably modeled after the Nat King Cole Trio. They recorded some tunes for Top Records. None did particularly well. Then he went to National Records, and they recorded there as well. And there were no charted songs out of that time.
Experiencing limited recording success with his self-named trio, Tommy continued writing songs through the late 1940s. Auditioning a composition for a record label could be costly, so out of necessity, he took matters into his own hands and managed to impress the executives at MGM.
I think there for a time he was having more polished vocalists, perhaps, to sing on his demos for auditions. But that cost money, and money was in short supply. And the way he got on with MGM was being short of cash, he just decided to do his own demo. So as a more recent entry into the music industry, they were looking for talent. So Tommy takes a song that he wrote, All Over Again, and goes into the studio, does the audition. And the producers liked the song well enough, but they liked his voice even more, and offered him a contract right away. You know, and suddenly he's in really big company. That was a big step up from National Records.
Tommy began recording with MGM in late 1950. He produced his first hit as a singer with The Morning Side of the Mountain, which reached number 24 on the Billboard Pop Chart in July 1951. But an even bigger hit was on the way. It's All in the Game borrowed the melody from a song that had been composed 40 years earlier by Charles G. Dawes, a businessman and Republican politician who would go on to serve as U.S. Vice President under Calvin Coolidge. Lyrics were added by Carl Sigman in 1951, and Tommy lent his voice soon thereafter.
5 different performers record the song, and so they're all in competition with each other, and Tommy is the one, his song comes out on top. He's competing against some established performers, but his song hits number 18 on the Billboard chart. So 2 hit songs in a row, actually 3, because the flip side of It's All in the Game was All Over Again, the song that he auditioned. And that went on the race chart at number 10, I believe. So suddenly, in the summer of 1951, Tommy has 3 charted songs, and the future looks very rosy. He must have just been on top of the world.
I think he had an ambitious schedule. My aunt shares that, he was always somewhere. She had a terrible time trying to keep up with him.
He's traveling with some big names. He was in with some big time heavy hitters, veteran entertainers.
Tommy's sudden success brought him appearances on The Perry Como Show and other television programs, and performances with the Les Paul and Mary Ford stage show. Hailed as a new singing sensation, he joined high-profile acts such as the Woody Herman Orchestra, the Mills Brothers, and Dinah Washington on the Caravan of Stars tour. He also paid visits, when his schedule allowed, to the family home in Henrico.
When I was born, he was already in New York and a star. And so when I was growing up and going to Richmond to visit my grandparents in the summer, my Uncle Tommy was in New York, and so I had no interactions with him there. I would hear about him, I would hear stories about him from my mom and my aunts and uncles, and I would see him occasionally at family gatherings at Christmas time, and of course that was all around, singing. We had 2 pianos in the house, and that was singing and playing the piano and of course enjoying the holiday season, and he was just a regular kind of person then. Away from that, of course, people would ask me a little about him when they realized that there was a connection. I would describe his personality as kind, polite, compassionate, determined, with a great sense of humor. He was an extremely handsome man, and he had a beautiful smile. And, we were all in just awe of him, really, because when he was a star. And he did have that air about him that was just sensational.
When you look at Tommy's picture on the album covers, there's always the big smile and the hands spread out. You think of him as a very amiable, approachable, friendly person, but he was no pushover.
Edwards suspected MGM was not properly disclosing financial information and thereby limiting his royalties, a matter that would eventually make its way before the New York State Supreme Court. He also found the label limiting him in another way, typecasting him into a certain genre of music.
Singers often get pigeonholed or categorized. MGM was shaping him as a pop balladeer. Tommy is, as we perceive him, what he was given to record. And if there were limitations on what he was given to record, then there were limitations on his talents and what he might have been able to achieve. So I do think the A&R people, the artists and repertoire people, make those decisions. And again, I think where Tommy was concerned, they were determined that he was going to be a crooner and chose his music for him.
Linger in my arms.
I think Tommy's songs became somewhat predictable. And once in a while, that would crop up in a review. So I think MGM failed him and not letting him do some other things that he was capable of doing. Had they done so, perhaps that would have prolonged that first round of success that he had. As it was, after 53, or perhaps even by then, sales were beginning to decline. They continued to decline in 54, and essentially by 55, he's not recording much or at all anymore.
As time moved on and things began to soften for him in terms of his career, and I think he hit a downturn. Yeah, he hit a downturn, and I don't know how and when all of that occurred, but I do know that he went through some depressing times. He was depressed and he was sad and he was in a dark place.
Tommy recorded very little, if at all, between 55 and 58. Those were down years for him. He was despondent, of course, perhaps drinking too much. It got to the point where he had to borrow money from friends in the music industry. And it was just touch and go until in 58 he was contacted by Morty Kraft. Tommy credits him for the comeback. Morty Kraft was a producer for MGM. Rock and roll was the thing in those days now, and Morty Kraft wanted to do what was called a rock-a-ballad, essentially a rock and roll ballad, a beat ballad. And he was looking around in the MGM library for a song to try that with, and looked at Tommy's catalog, looked at Tommy's big hit record from 51, It's All in the Game, and decided to have that arranged as a beat ballad. The story is that he had but one recording session left on the original contract. He'd been out of the loop for, I don't know, 32 months or so, out of work, despondent, maybe drinking a little bit too much, maybe smoking a little bit too much, who knows? And he has this opportunity for something. He doesn't know how it's going to turn out. But he comes in, and Tommy was simply never in better voice. I think something key to this is that it's not another slow, lazy song. It's sort of a mid-tempo song. Tommy loved music that would animate him. And the song came out and just was a monster. It hit the market and just soared to the top. It was just huge. He was back in the game again.
Dick Clark described his return as the comeback of the year. The Henrico County native performed on American Bandstand and also played the iconic variety program of the era, The Ed Sullivan Show.
I did see him on the Ed Sullivan Show, and at that time I was, in college, and of course I was surrounded by, friends that were questioning, is that really your uncle? Is that really your uncle? Wow, that's great.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, here is a youngster who's come up with the record now is riding number 3 in the national charts. Here is Tommy Edwards singing It's All in the Game. Now, Tommy, kick it loose there. Many a tear has to fall, but it's all in the game.
The Dick Clarks and the Ed Sullivans and, all of the big television hosts of the times thought that Tommy Edwards was the greatest. And so, of course, if they thought so, then the whole world would think so.
It's On the Game was a hit, rode high in the charts in Australia, Canada, and in the United Kingdom. And of course, some of his other tunes also did well on the charts in those countries.
It's All in the Game would earn Tommy a gold record and go on to sell some 3.5 million copies. But it wasn't his only hit. Between 1958 and 1960, Tommy charted another 13 songs, including 3 that climbed into Billboard's top 20. But as Tommy's career was peaking, the popular music scene was shifting beneath him. He was a crooner at a time when more and more people were craving rock and roll.
Help me information.
He was still doing very sweet, mellow tunes, not totally unlike what he was doing in the first phase of his career with MGM. They just were not the kinds of songs that would attract teenagers. I think Tommy was still being marketed to teenagers, but Tommy wasn't a rock and roller and he wasn't a rhythm and blues guy either. What he was, again, was a pop balladeer.
You've grown cold and no longer care for me.
His style was no longer the style that many listeners wanted to hear.
Well, after having reached the heights, really, of popularity, I'm sure it was just a blur. And I think, Tim, it went by very quickly, 58, 59, 60, and I think he kind of regretted that they weren't more prolonged. So in any case, again, experiencing a gradual decline in popularity. It's the early 50s all over again.
1960 was the last year that one of Tommy's songs appeared on Billboard's pop chart. MGM continued to release his recordings in subsequent years, but his sales dropped. In 1962, he scored a legal victory when the New York State Supreme Court ordered MGM to disclose its royalty figures. By the mid-1960s, Tommy had moved to a smaller label, but a 1966 release failed to rekindle his popularity. In 1967, he returned to his roots in Henrico.
Nobody ever treated Tommy as though he were down and out, even though that was truly the case during some of those times. He was never treated that way here locally. He was always given kind of a hero's welcome, if you will.
And I think he may still have been getting a stipend when he came back home, but I don't think the stipend was much.
Tommy never appeared to be wealthy in any way, shape, or form. Quite honestly, just the opposite.
I think that my Uncle Tommy was taken advantage of by some of the recording studios and some of the individuals that were managing his career. I think he was taken advantage of. When he came back to Richmond in 1967, he actually moved into the family home and lived with my Aunt Jessie. So the two of them were living there in the family home. Everyone else had departed. And then, of course, those were some of the sad days. He was drinking heavily and not doing very well.
Once removed from stardom and the people who knew him in that context, things were very different for him. And I think he was lonely, particularly for somebody who was outgoing and liked the company of other people the way he did. I know that he was frequenting, perhaps a little too often, a restaurant over on Quioccasin, the Round Table.
The Round Table was mostly a neighborhood place. Good place for lunch, good place for dinner, good place for entertainment. When Tommy showed up, everything kind of stopped for a minute. And whenever he came in, somebody would put a quarter in the jukebox and play one of his songs. He would go up and start singing with it, then turn the jukebox off and continue singing on his own perfect pitch. And the guys just loved that. Everybody stopped to listen. He had an incredible voice. He just turned on, he lit up. I'm convinced that's when he was the happiest, was when he was singing.
Tommy was no longer recording, but continued to perform periodically. Bookings took him as far away as Winnipeg, Canada, and to U.S. Army bases in Germany. He also gave shows at local venues, such as the Red Barn Theater and the Swing High, Swing Low Review, where one writer described Tommy as a crowd pleaser who still has a lot of talent going for him. It was not enough to revive his career, however. In declining health, Tommy passed away at home on Pemberton Road on October 23, 1969, 8 days after his 47th birthday.
What actually took Tommy away in 1969, I think, was a combination of, heavy drinking and depression, and the wear and tear on his body from the career, followed by depression, followed by drinking. I think his body just broke down.
Tommy died at home of complications from a diseased liver. In a word, he hemorrhaged, and that was a terrible way to go, I think.
All I remember was my husband telling me, "Did you hear?" calling me from the radio station saying, "Did you hear?" And did I hear what? Tommy Edwards is dead. And it was like just a silent moment. I hate to see somebody die when they're not on top of the world.
My Uncle Tommy's passing at 47 was a sad time. It was a sad time for the family, but the world lost a fabulous musician. And it just was a sad time. That talent to be lost.
It was not a very big funeral. Very low key, as a matter of fact. Not sure what I expected. I expected more people there than what I saw. But it was quiet, mostly family, and not a celebrity's funeral, which is probably a good thing. Tommy probably would not have liked that because that to him was not real. Family and friends were real, and that's who was there for him. All the radio stations that you could find in Richmond that day were playing his songs all day long. Even the ones that normally did not play that style of music were playing his songs. So Richmond gave him a fond farewell.
Au revoir, a reason. In any language, it's the same. Good night, my darling, for just a while. Adios and cheerio. Don't forget me ever. Just listen to my plea.